Welcome back to the Magnolia Media Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan M. Ruggiero, joined today by our co-host.
I'm your co-host, Courtney.
All right, Miss Courtney, we're going to start off with Vive la France. The French unexpectedly had a leftward win in the parliamentary elections on Sunday. So that's an excellent sign, as early election results, at least the first round of election results, showed Marine Le Pen's RN party the favorite to take control of Parliament, which would have been really a terrifying move for such an important ally of the United States. However, after the dissolution of a couple of leftward parties that sort of merged together, the left to far left, and when I say far left, we're talking actual communist parties, managed to win an outright majority in French Parliament, meaning that the Prime Minister will now change, and France is on an even more progressive trajectory than it was before. This coming on the heels of Keir Starmer and the Labour Party absolutely wiping the Conservatives off the map in Great Britain after 14 years of power. The Conservative Party, the Tory Party, the MPs are no more. They no longer control any element of power on the Isle of Great Britain, and that's from Scotland to Wales. I'm not sure how many years exactly it's been, but it's been a long time since there's been uniformity between Scotland, England, and Wales. So congratulations to them. This November, we're going to try to make it a trifecta. And that's where we pick up our coverage today, with the ongoing Joe Biden hysteria, which I believe, due to some audio we'll play you a little later in the episode, has more or less come to an end. We had a bounce back in the polls post-debate, something I don't think any of us were expecting. I have said on this podcast that I believed the first polls after the debate that would come out yesterday and today would be terrible for Democrats. Instead, Joe Biden has now taken a dominant, outside the margin of error lead in both Michigan and Wisconsin, two of the three states he will absolutely have to win in order to be reelected. So, Ms. Courtney, give us your thoughts on the action of this past week, or lack thereof.
I have a theory about Biden's bounce back in the polls. I'm thinking that everybody, similar to like we talked about where Biden was just kind of floating along, we all thought it was going to be an easy win. I think people saw him stumbling a little bit and it scared everybody. And now we're thinking, oh my God, we need to rally behind this guy now. And I'm thinking it actually is having a better impact than if he had a wonderful debate almost.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think there's some sympathy, there's some fear. I think there's some indignation because people also watched a man stand on stage and speak clearly, but spoke in lies. I mean, 30 lies in 90 minutes? That's almost as many lies as a person can make up in that much time. He even took credit, this being Donald Trump, of course, elderly convicted felon Donald Trump, took credit for $35 insulin, which we all know was a Joe Biden thing.
But the problem with that is that they weren't fact-checking him or rebutting him when he was saying those. I mean, it doesn't matter that you and I know that they're lies. I mean, they needed to be, he says X, no, wait a minute. Like that's the way you have to treat the general public watching this. Like, they forgot half of what he said at this point.
Right. I think also there were the optics of, this is a 3-on-1 debate because Dana Bash and Jake Tapper are doing nothing. They're not in any way punishing, criticizing, or telling Trump to shut up when you could hear him over the microphone because he didn't stop talking just because they cut the mics. You could hear him being picked up in the background of Biden's mic, which again when you have a ferocious cold, one so bad that they called doctors in to test you for COVID, which is similar to the cold I had, what was it, about a month ago, where
you were
for
pretty
10
sick.
straight days I couldn't podcast. I couldn't speak long enough to make it interesting for you. For you guys, so I just opted out, and we took a big setback and a big hit for that. But again, it was that, or have a podcast with me coughing and hacking and really just sounding awful. So I understand that portion of it. Joe Biden is not 65-year-old Joe Biden anymore. We understand that, but he knows how to pull every lever of government. He now has increased power that we don't want someone like Donald Trump to ever have. I believe it'll be overturned eventually, as Plessy v. Ferguson was, as so many terrible, terrible rulings by the Supreme Court have been overturned over the years. Of course, Plessy v. Ferguson created separate but equal, which set up Jim Crow in the South in, I believe, 1902. And again, there's just been one after another that have had to be overturned because facts changed and they were simply illegal or unconstitutional. So there was also incredible defiance by President Biden after having apparently he's had doctors coming and going from the White House. We don't know if the doctors were there to examine Joe, if they were there to examine one of the hundreds of people who work in the White House and have access to Walter Reed Medical Center. But we do know that doctors have been coming and going from the White House, likely making sure that Biden is 100% up to the task of being president for another 4 years. Because it does seem to me that Biden has had the most effortless presidency that I've ever witnessed, largely because he's appointed the right people to the right position at the right time. People said, oh, he just appointed Pete Buttigieg because Buttigieg won or was tied in the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucus along with Bernie Sanders back in 2020. I don't think that's why he did it. I think it's because Pete Buttigieg rebuilt a city like South Bend, Indiana, and seemed like exactly the right person, exactly the right type of technocrat necessary to run the Department of Transportation. And, of course, Jim Clyburn, being a big part of the Biden campaign this time around, gives him such extraordinary pull with African-American voters. And I think we saw a little of that over the weekend as well, as, of course, he gave that speech. Was it in Detroit? In the black church? I missed that, actually.
I did miss where it was. I do know it was in the black church, though.
Both of us would have to go back and look at our notes to see exactly where it was, but it seems that the backbone of the Democratic Party, black voters, whether it's in states like Michigan, Wisconsin, or in states like North Carolina, Georgia, and even here in Tennessee, if people actually voted in Tennessee, it's a majority minority party, meaning the majority of Democratic voters are African American. So, anyway, moving on to Biden and his defiant position on staying in the race. He actually called in this morning to Morning Joe and gave us his thoughts. So we're going to play that little sound bite for you now.
All over the country, and while Trump is riding around in his golf cart, filling out his golf cart before he even hits the ball. But anyway, he hadn't been anywhere in 10 days. I've been all over the country, number one. And I've gone over the country for several reasons. One, to make sure my instinct was right about the party still wanting me to be the nominee. And all the data shows that the average Democrat out there who voted, the 14 million of them that voted for me, still want me to be the nominee, number one. Number two, the idea that Donald Trump has gained in any substantial way as his argument to why he should be president is anywhere convincing than it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago. It's just not there, and we're just starting to focus on Trump. And look, I attended services, spoke to over 600 people at Mount Airy Church of God in Christ in Philly. I stopped by campaign field offices with John Fetterman and Madeline Dean, both strongly supporting me. The president and the first lady, we spoke at a campaign ice cream social for AFSCME, Council 13 in Harrisburg. 40 minutes after we spoke with supporters. Stopped by Denim Coffee. I mean, I was with the governor of Pennsylvania, who's still strongly supporting me. I mean, so look, and the fact is that this week I'm going to be hosting NATO Summit here in D.C. Going to hold a press conference on Thursday. On Wednesday, I met with the National Union leaders of the AFL-CIO. On Friday, I traveled to Detroit, Michigan for a campaign event. Just on down the line. And so I'm not getting any of what I was told. I wanted to make sure I was right, that the average voter out there still wanted Joe Biden. And I'm confident they do. And I'm confident, and like I said, the press is with me. I think they've been fairly fair. I haven't read any reporting they did today. But the fact is that, I think they have to acknowledge we had large crowds, enthusiastic crowds. And, and now they're talking about whether I use a prompter. Well, I did it all extemporaneously. The fact of the matter is, I use prompters too. I don't get that. But anyway, the bottom line here is that we're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024. We had a Democratic nominating process where the voters spoke clearly. I won 14 million of those votes, etc.
Well, that was quite defiant by President Joe Biden, as he more or less laid out the case for why he's not going to give up the nomination, the Democratic nomination for president in 2024. And after going back and forth personally, after struggling with this issue for a week or so, I realized that during no broker convention, when there's been a broker convention, that candidate has never won in American history. And we've gone through the polling scenarios, the issues that any candidate who took over at this point would have to face. They already have the a label for Kamala Harris, the DEI president. Again, Gavin Newsom, who is probably the most natural fit to run for president, the most historically charming white male that you could find to run atop the ticket, would have to deal with the fact he's the governor of California. And while California is the fourth largest economy on earth and the most populous state in the union, it also has $6 a gallon gasoline. So I decided that we would talk about that a little bit today here on the Magnolia Media Podcast, because I am now fully and firmly in the Biden camp. I don't think there's time, the opportunity, or that it's wise to replace Joe Biden. What about you, Miss Courtney?
I think Kamala Harris would have a shot, but I do agree. I think especially at this late in the game that Biden is the nominee. We need to rally behind him. He's got the experience. We need to stick with him.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a large part of it comes down to trying to rush 2028. And I understand that a lot of young people, a lot of people who won't vote, let's be frank, millennials were, my generation, we were very engaged because a lot of us were just coming out of college when the financial collapse happened. We were in high school when 9/11 happened. We, set records for volunteering for the armed services. We set records for turnout among people under the age of 30. We are now the largest voting bloc in the United States, finally pushing these baby boomers off the rock. So the most important voting bloc going forward for the next 20 or 30 years in the United States is the millennial generation. but Generation Z. And there's actually a very interesting podcast on this called The Wilderness, put on by the guys over at Pod Save America, which of course won Best Political Podcast this year at the podcast version of the Academy Awards, whatever they call it, the Webbies, I think. They did a piece where they spoke to people under the age of 25, 28, whatever it was, and talked to them about politics. They're not politically aligned, so that's the first sign of an uninformed voter, when they don't know which basic party platform they support. They've been completely brought up on social media as a primary source of news. So again, they have no idea where their allegiances lie. They have no real concept or grasp of political history in the United States and how conservatives have sort of put their foot on the necks of young people.
I think it's kind of sad, and it's really the fault of the parents for not encouraging or teaching their children to be more politically literate. Like, even despite wherever my family lies, I mean, I do wish that growing up, it was political literacy was kind of more pushed, until you and I met. I really couldn't have told you really what party I 100% was in.
And it's not so much about being 100% one or the other. We both, I think it's fair to say, share shades of, I think there's a little bit of libertarianism in
Little
both of
purple
us.
in there.
Huh?
There's a little purple in there.
A little
with us.
bit. Little libertarianism. Let me be clear. My vote is not up for grabs. Not in this election, not in the next election, and not until there's some sort of party realignment, as there was in the 1960s. Unless something of that magnitude were to occur, I will likely never vote Republican in my life, because I was there in 1996. I wasn't old enough to vote, but I was there and witnessed what Republicans were attempting to do in 1998 with Newt Gingrich. When 2000, when the Republican Party in the state of Florida actually helped a Republican candidate steal an election. I was there in 2004 when we had high hopes for John Kerry, an actual war hero, running against a petulant child that was George W. Bush. And here, while we're speaking on George W. Bush, just while I've mentioned his name, the Supreme Court justices who have caused us the most headache, the most torment over the last 6 months, have been Clarence Thomas, nominated and appointed by George H.W. Bush, Old Man Bush, Iran-Contra Bush, selling cocaine in the inner cities of America through the CIA Bush, former head of the CIA Bush, and his spoiled, rotten, alcoholic son, George W. Bush. So Samuel Alito being one of those, John Roberts appointed by George W. Bush, Samuel Alito by W. Bush, and Clarence Thomas by H.W. Bush, the elder statesman, if you will, of the Supreme Court. All the more reason to rally behind Joe Biden, because there could be as many as 3 openings on the Supreme Court, as liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was appointed by Barack Obama, has hinted at her wish to retire despite being only 70 years old. That should be a sign to everyone about the state of the Supreme Court, even behind the scenes, that things aren't good there. So not letting W off the hook for the trillions of dollars in debt, for the thousands of dead Americans that died in senseless wars, since you were unwilling to do anything about Saudi Arabia's part in September 11th, that you took your eye off the ball, allowing September 11th to happen, and now you're a doddering old man living in Dallas, Texas, traveling around the country, painting the portraits of injured veterans that you injured. Now, you didn't plant the bombs on the side of the roads that blew their arms off or whatever it might be, but you put them in that position for no reason because your vice president ran you around as if he had you by the ear. It was an embarrassing presidency for the United States, and you're getting sort of a free pass nowadays, W. That's the way it's said down here, W. You're getting a free pass now that Trump came along and sort of moved you out of the bottom spot. I mean, Herbert Hoover will largely be remembered as one of the 3 worst presidents of all time. 150 academics, presidential historians came together and voted Trump the worst president in American history. I wouldn't put you, W, very far behind. I don't think there's any place to forgive or forget George W. Bush, especially for we older millennials who were juniors, seniors in high school when you allowed September 11th to happen, when so many of our friends had signed up for the military because it seemed like a good option for young people who didn't come from affluent families, and then found out they were going to be shipped off to this place called Afghanistan to fight a war against a group of people that we could not beat. The Russians had just had that proven to them less than a decade earlier, and we failed to learn those lessons because, again, I don't believe W was ever in control of his own White House. I believe Dick Cheney was. I think most everyone agrees with that. Dick Cheney wouldn't have taken the job and walked away from being president of Halliburton if not for all of the perks that came with it, and that's essentially running the entirety of the federal government. And again, Samuel Alito and John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, are the 2 who seem to have no conscience whatsoever, none, and view what's going on in the United States as a war on them, the elite of elites. $4 million and trips paid for by Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow. That's Clarence Thomas. Mega donors to the GOP who have constant business in front of the court. So, in no way do I want to glorify, forgive, or move on from the memory of disgraced former president, 43rd President of the United States, George W. Bush, who again was an absolute humiliation, and his memory is largely going to be positive because the next Republican president was dementia disaster J. Trump. So just my little 2 cents, because I'm a little older and remember what W did to this country intimately. So it certainly stays with me that W was able to get away with the things that he did, and was left himself open for prosecution. But it was the Obama administration's decision to just move on and to not bother with it, because also he violated one of the things that makes America great. We don't torture people. Until Bush came along, took his eye off the ball, allowed 9/11 to happen, and then suspended habeas corpus for all of these people caught in Afghanistan and Iraq who may or may not have had anything to do with the planning of September 11th, and summarily tortured them for 20 years because we didn't know what to do with them. And that was all under W's watch.
I wonder if that's part of the problem with the Republican Party nowadays and thinking they can just get away with everything is because Obama let Bush get away with it. So they can just continue to do it too.
The other option was to go after the Marines.
And I do understand why Obama just kind of let it go and moved on. Like,
Right.
I get it too. I understand sometimes it's just easier to.
And at that time, it was 2009. We had the financial collapse, which is another courtesy of W. W is the one who allowed the mortgage-backed securities to be packaged together and sold. He's the one who, again, took his eye off the economy, took his eye off the environment, took his eye off everything. Osama bin Laden dissolved the Bin Laden Commission, didn't think he needed it when a man who was so much smarter than George W. Bush and Bill Clinton had appointed the Bin Laden Commission because we didn't have a DHS back then. And I know a lot of people don't remember a time before DHS or TSA. We didn't have the Department of Homeland Security, which essentially brings together all 17 intelligence agencies so that they could produce one report, and we have interagency cooperation, which was something that plagued us prior to the towers coming down on that Tuesday morning in September of 2001, which I witnessed live on television as I just happened to be in that position, despite the fact it was a school day. It was, again, looking back at it, how anyone votes Republican in this country who's not a billionaire looking for a tax cut is hard for me to understand, given the grave mistakes they've made over the last 50 years.
I think some of it's willful ignorance too.
Oh yeah, I think they want for these people to be something that they're not, and they'll put their faith in them no matter what. And then of course you have the Chip Roys of the world. Chip Roy, a congressman from Texas, who said he only voted for Donaldson to be Speaker of the House because he's black, and Hakeem Jeffries is black, and he's the minority leader in the House. He will be Speaker of the House in January after the elections. And so Byron Donaldson, who is a shameful character on the right in American politics, who's black, and again, Chip Roy, perhaps the most outwardly racist person in the House of Representatives, had those comments for Byron Donalds, saying that he was only backing Byron Donalds because he was black and it would level the playing field in some way, when Byron Donalds is one of 2 black members of the entire GOP Congress. All of them.
I think I definitely agree 100%. We need more diversity in Supreme Court, in Congress, 100%. But you shouldn't vote for someone just because they're black.
No, and I mean, his whole point was this racist trope. This is Chip Roy. That because Democrats have a black leader, of course he's not Speaker yet, he will be in January, that we should go for Byron Donalds because he's the only black Republican in the House of Representatives, and then of course Tim Scott being the other black congressional member, the senator from South Carolina. That's the entirety of the Black Republican Party, by the way, folks. The Congressional Black Caucus, which I believe is 30 members or so roughly a third of the entire Democratic Party in Congress and in the United States Senate, is entirely Democrat. Byron Donalds does not caucus with the Congressional Black Caucus. That would be a shocker. Byron Donalds is one of those people who seem to run away from the fact that he's an African American male and toward this concept of being a second-class citizen for the sake of money or power or whatever it might be, however you want to look at it. Again, I'm not here to speak on behalf of African Americans. It's just, it's very, very painfully obvious, and it brings out certain feelings that, again, stuff that we should probably leave to the side. But, Chip Roy, shame on you. Byron Donalds, shame on you. And George W. Bush, wherever you're at out there talking to yourself and painting pictures of the men you're responsible for injuring, this was just sort of a big FU to all of you guys.
I want to segue into something and get your opinion on it. So when we were watching TV earlier, we were watching the news, cannot remember which Democratic congresswoman it was on one of the new media outlets and refused to disclose who she voted for in the 2008 election.
No, it was 2004, yeah.
Or, I'm sorry, yeah, the second term for Obama.
Yeah.
I feel like because she's a representative of people, that her vote, as she put it, should not be protected and kept private, that she should be required to disclose who she voted for because she's a representative of people. What do you think?
Yeah. Now, what Courtney's referring to is a 2014 Senate race when an assistant secretary of state under President Obama wouldn't admit who she voted for in the 2012 election. And that led to suspicion that she had voted for Mitt Romney instead of the president she actually served. And so during the debates, she was attacked on this line of questioning time and time again. And yes, I agree with Miss Courtney that when you become a public figure and start absorbing a $200,000 a year salary paid to you by the American taxpayer, your right to privacy when it comes to for whom you voted disappears. You can have that right if you want to remain a private citizen. You don't have to tell anybody anything. It's none of their business. But when you're supposed to be a member of the party faithful, and instead of running toward your values, you run away from them and toward the right to try to win a Senate election in Kentucky against an absolutely evil man in Mitch McConnell. Let's make no mistake, Mitch McConnell has been one of the most evil figures in American politics in the last 30 years. She shot herself in the foot by, again, not embracing democratic values, not embracing the Democratic Party, and not embracing a president who was twice elected and left office with a 55% approval rating.
And I'm not saying that she shouldn't have done that. Obviously, she shouldn't have voted for Mitch McConnell if she did. However, it would have been really easy for her to just lie and say that she did vote for Obama.
I mean,
like that.
If she was
kind of shot herself.
lying.
Yeah, like you said, she kind of shot herself in the foot.
Yeah, there was no chance. And Mitch McConnell has been ripe for the taking many a time. The issue becomes he's done so much for big money donors and for billionaire elites that it's led to when it's election time for Mitch McConnell, who's not running for re-election, by the way, after his staring into space episodes last summer, when he just froze at one point for 14 minutes before somebody finally ran up on stage and got the former majority leader of the United States Senate off the stage because he looked so bad, just glassy-eyed standing there with his mouth open. That's the fate awaiting anybody who lives the political life of a man like Mitch McConnell, the political cowardice of a man like Mitch McConnell, a man who would hold a seat open on the Supreme Court for an entire year after the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia and refuse even a hearing from Merrick Garland, who is now obviously Attorney General of the United States, which threw the Supreme Court into complete disarray, led to the notorious RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, dying, and now there being a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. And I'm not letting Justice Kennedy off the hook here either. What type of son of a bitch are you, Justice Kennedy, to decide in the middle of the Trump administration, after having been the swing vote on the United States Senate United States Supreme Court for so many years, suddenly deciding, you know what, I'm going to resign slap dab in the middle of the Trump administration with a Republican-controlled Senate.
Something's fishy about that.
So that Brett Kavanaugh can take my place. A man who's unhirable by any private law firm because of his alcoholism, who lied during his confirmation hearings, as did Neil Gorsuch, as did Amy Coney Barrett. They bald-faced lied to the American public. And the rule for abstaining from hearing even having a vote on Merrick Garland, the rule invoked by Mitch McConnell, which is not a law, it's not even a Senate rule, it's just something he made up, was called the Biden rule. When Biden in 1992 said a Supreme Court justice nomination should be put on hold because it's only a month before a presidential election. He used that and said, well, it's only 11 months before a presidential election, so we shouldn't have any new appointments to the Supreme Court. Then appointed Amy Coney Barrett with literally days left on the clock before the 2020 presidential election. That's how we end up with the 6-3 majority. Surprisingly, Amy Coney Barrett has been a more conscientious justice than has Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, or again, the old conservatives who've been around since the Bush years, and Clarence Thomas, who is a complete lost cause. And if Biden decides he wants to abuse these new powers given to him, should be the first man on the Supreme Court to be let off in handcuffs. In session, in his robe, lead him off in handcuffs. So it's as humiliating and debilitating a moment for the Supreme Court as we will ever see. But again, Amy Coney Barrett in some way has backfired on them. I'm not saying she's some freedom fighter for women. I'm just saying she seems to have more of a conscience than the rest of the Supreme Court.
I don't think Biden's going to abuse his newfound power, but a part of me wishes he did. But we are getting close to wrapping up here, and I think we got one more point to run into. I think Trump is saying some more lies now.
Yeah, Trump is finally the double standard seems to be breaking, and the news, the mainstream legacy media, is talking about his mental lapses and his recent admitting on a telephone call that he knew he lost the 2020 election. He knew it. So all of it was a farce. All of that pain, death, suffering, attack on the United States Capitol, these crazy rulings to protect him from prosecution by the Supreme Court have been for nothing, because we all now know without a shadow of a doubt that the man, because the words came from his mouth, that the man knew he lost the 2020 election and was just trying whatever he could, just throwing crap at the wall and seeing what sticks. That was, or is, Donald Trump's style. And his mental lapses have been, wow, he doesn't know what year it is. He thinks he ran against Barack Obama. He thinks he beat Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and then, of course, had an election stolen from him by Barack Obama. And this is apparently the first time he's running against Joe Biden. Joe Bride.
This is another appalling thing. Like, people are so up in arms about Biden's cognitive abilities, but they don't want to mention that Trump's actually worse off.
He is a lot worse off. He's 78 years old. He's 300. He's 300 pounds. If he's 10 pounds, he's 300. Let's put it that way. He says he's 215 pounds. That's absolutely laughable.
There's not a chance in hell he weighs less than I do.
No. And 215 pounds. That he's 6'3". He might be 5'11", and he wears lifts. I mean, it's obvious he wears lifts. You can see the lifts. The man's not even good at disguising the fact he is a fat, short, bald man who gets spray tanned with his raccoon eyes, sucks down Diet Cokes all day, Probably. Diet Cokes, by the way, are full of toxins that are terrible for your skin. If you're going to have a soda pop, just drink one with sugar in it. Of course, unless, of course, you have diabetes or you're pre-diabetic. I understand. You want something other than just water or tea. Have a Diet Coke, fine. But
what we're
sucking
saying
them
is
down all day,
moderation.
it's terrible for your skin.
What we're saying is moderation.
Yeah, moderation. But
obviously Trump is not in moderation about anything.
But being a woman, and a woman who takes pride in her appearance, and you do your makeup, you have a skincare routine, doesn't the ingredients that make up diet soda, aren't they absolutely disastrous for long-term skincare?
Oh, they're awful. And I mean, not even long-term issues. You were having issues with your knee when you were drinking diet soda with the swelling. And it's, I mean, could be correlation, not causation. But, I mean, as soon as you stop drinking those sodas, the diet sodas and the Coke Zeros, I mean, it went away.
Yeah, I did that myself because I'll keep a few Cokes in the house. I take them with certain medications I prescribed, or I'll drink a cold Coke throughout the day. I'm not really a big drinker as far as alcohol goes, so it's sort of my guilty pleasure. And I had switched on to 0-calorie sodas and Diet Coke for probably 6 months to a year, and suddenly my right knee swelled up. I had trouble moving around. I mean, I was really scared of what it might have mean for my long-term health. I quit them. And within 6 months, the swelling was completely gone. The pain, the discomfort, the cracking, all of the awful noises coming out of that knee, the idea I might need a knee replacement at 40 was sort of went away. They have a terrible impact on your health. So they say Donald Trump drinks 8 to 12 Diet Cokes a day, eats McDonald's twice a day. These are not the behaviors of your traditional billionaire, first of all. Secondly, it absolutely has to be terrible for his health.
I have no idea how he eats McDonald's that often. I eat it once and my stomach hurts for days.
I haven't had McDonald's in
I grabbed some fries on the
time.
way back from lunch today.
They
do have good fries, but that was about it. But I think we're just about done here. You got anything else?
No, not. I don't think so. Let me double check our notes here and make sure we didn't jump over anything.
And definitely congratulations to France. Congratulations to Britain. Hopefully here before too long, U.S. is going to make up that trifecta.
Yes, I hope that we can round it out, because we have the British in some strange way to thank for colonization and common law. But we have the French to thank for democracy, existentialism, and as Sacha Baron Cohen said in the famous movie Talladega Nights, the ménage à trois. So France has given a lot to the United States, a lot to the world, not just the United States, but as the three great Western powers of the world, who are actually allowed to have nukes. Sorry, Germany. We know you have a larger economy, but we
don't
still
trust you
can't
yet.
trust you with the red button. What's that?
I said we don't trust him yet.
I mean, we love you guys. It's a fabulous country. I've heard nothing but great things about Germany, especially from military friends who were stationed in, I believe, the military bases in Frankfurt. And, I'd love to go to Oktoberfest. I'd love to see Berlin. It's not atop my list of places to go in Europe, but they are places I would like to see. However, we still can't trust you with a nuclear weapon because you started World War I and World War II. Again, we love you, but Slava Ukraine, because the Ukrainians, they're taking a beating right now, but it's because they're just trying to get through the summer so that they can mount a real counteroffensive after the Republican House of Representatives held up funding for our ally in Ukraine for 5 months, setting them behind. However, this war is also costing Russia an estimated 50,000 troops a month. By the way, the United States lost roughly 60,000 troops in the 10 years of Vietnam. So I don't know how Russia, a country of 150 million people, are absorbing this type of loss to their young male population and not revolting against the dictator Vladimir Putin. So Slava Ukraine, Viva la France, and go Labor. So we hope that progressives, liberals, Democrats here in the United States are able to round out that trifecta, as Miss Courtney said. Okay, well, I believe that does it for us. This has been another episode of the Magnolia Media Podcast. Quick bit of housekeeping. Please check us out on Patreon. Again, once we have enough subscribers to our Patreon, I'll start publishing a newsletter on Friday that'll be behind that $5, a half a cup of Starbucks coffee to support our work to keep progressive Southerners on the airwaves talking about politics to a group of people who are very much in a silo and don't get to hear this type of content very often. Also check out my Instagram. It's really our company Instagram, but you'll mostly see my ugly mug on there at Magnolia John 2024. Again, it's Magnolia John 2024 on Threads, on Instagram, Magnolia John on Twitter X. And if you want to donate to our Patreon, if you want to support us, it's patreon.com/Magnolia Media Network, not podcast, network. So again, thank you so much. We have a little surprise for you at the end of today's episode, so be sure and listen to the outro music. Miss Courtney?
I'm good over here. You guys have a great day.
All right. We thank you so much. And until next time, be well.